This isn't a problem. But there's model legislation out there for it, and they're bringing it in here. And unfortunately, a lot of it's passing.
Do you think it's important that constituents know who is supporting the bills, who exactly is supporting the bills that you're pitching on their behalf?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think that would be wise, right? If we could know that. I mean, again, I think if some of the lawmakers don't even know that, it'd be hard to get that information out. But I do think that would be really healthy.
There were 634 bills introduced in the State House this session, between the House and the Senate, most of them from the House side. That doesn't even include the dozens of resolutions, joint resolutions, proclamations, and memorials. And that's a lot of moving around the Capitol building. How many of those do you think are unique? We got this question from David a couple weeks ago. We were talking about requiring petitioners to tell if they are being paid. Transparency in petitions, he says, asks. How about transparency in legislation as to who writes the bill and how much that costs? Can anyone say ALEC? Well, David's right. ALEC, or the American Legislative Exchange Council, is one of the bill mills that kicks out legislation for states to copy. Even those bills pitched as being unique and good for Idaho aren't actually original or driven by constituent demand. These model bills, as they're called, mostly come from out of state, and they often directly benefit a handful of special interests, like huge corporations. Well, these groups push the same policies in capitals across the country, and in recent years, many of those special interests have leaned very far to the right. Here's Morgan Romero.
First order of business, roll call.
Senate will come to orders.
Many of the bills introduced in Idaho's State House
House is a quorum and is ready to do business.
don't originate there.
House Bill 419,
Senate Bill 1252,
House Bill 620,
House Bill 599,
House Bill 689,
Senate Bill 1245.
They don't even originate in the state.
This bill is crafted so well.
Every legislative session, several are copied and pasted from think tanks, lobbyists, and corporate-backed national special interests. Groups dubbed bill mills.
First order of business, roll call.
These groups often pitch lawmakers bills before the legislative session, sometimes at conferences.
Does it make things easier, like you don't have to reinvent the wheel?
This existed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When Boise attorney Steve Scanlon and lobbyist Russell Westerberg served in the legislature more than 4 decades ago.
For some of those folks, it's an easier access. It's a cheaper place to do business.
When politics didn't seem as partisan. Being a part-time citizen legislature, some lawmakers tell me it's more efficient and effective to be handed model legislation than draft up their own bills from scratch.
Is model legislation, from your perspective, inherently a good thing, a bad thing, or does it just depend?
Depends on your viewpoint. You know, this years ago, that's where we got land use planning from. Years ago, that's where we got kindergartens from. So, you know, there's been model legislation in many ways has served Idaho and its constituency well.
But today, with politics so polarized, does model legislation serve Idahoans well?
Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing.
Depends who you ask.
They're dinking around doing this bizarre stuff, and it's a lot of solutions in search of a problem that doesn't exist in Idaho.
And it definitely depends on the legislation.
You've seen that it is working in other places, and it can benefit Idaho. We should bring ideas like that here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Republican Representatives Jordan Redmond and Brandon Mitchell have introduced or co-sponsored model bills.
Yes, yep, I have.
Sometimes leaning on the Legislative Services Office to tweak them.
If we get model legislation and it's already been through the court system, then we know it's constitutional. Makes it easy.
In the 2024 session, 7 investigates found Idaho lawmakers pitched at least a dozen model bills. A handful went on to pass both houses this session and even become law, like an amendment to state law allowing safe haven sites where people can leave their babies to use baby boxes.
House Bill 620 as amended by State Affairs Committee regarding knives.
Or a bill barring cities and counties from regulating where you can bring knives.
We have the world's best military.
Copy and paste legislation that drove contentious debate cropped up too, including the Defend the Guard Act.
This bill is ripe with political agendas and deceptive overtones.
And a Senate bill shielding pesticide manufacturers from certain liabilities, supported by Bayer, the manufacturer of Roundup. Then there was copycat legislation in a category of its own.
But I do think a lot of the bills we've taken up this year are social issues, for sure.
Social issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion, transgender care, ballot harvesting, pronouns and sex and gender definitions, books in libraries. Take Senator Brian Lenny's bill, for example, trying to get rid of DEI offices at Idaho higher ed institutions. While Lenny claimed it was custom, 7 Investigates discovered it was copied and pasted from the Manhattan Institute, a conservative New York think tank that rakes in tens of millions of dollars from undisclosed donors each year.
It is my pleasure to bring to you today House Bill 421.
Republican Representatives Julianne Young and Bruce Skog sponsored model legislation, which passed the Senate Tuesday despite strong opposition.
It creates an unsafe space, a more unsafe space for my community, but it creates an unsafe space for all women.
Changing sex and gender definitions in Idaho code.
I've had input both from the Heritage Foundation and from ADF.
They filled in the blanks on a bill from the Heritage Foundation, a highly influential right-wing think tank backed by more than $100 million each year in dark money intended to influence public policy. As a nonprofit, like most think tanks, Heritage Foundation doesn't have to disclose its donors.
These procedures and medical interventions carry substantial risks.
Also from Young and Skog, also based off model legislation, a new law banning the use of public money for transgender care.
It simply answers the question of whether we believe it is an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars.
Lawmakers copied it from Do No Harm, an advocacy organization claiming to protect healthcare from identity politics.
I think some of the issues that we're taking on now is actually preemption issues, right? Like getting in front of things because you do see what's happening in other parts of the country.
There's some real issues out there that I think get ignored because of the distraction of the more emotional issues.
Critics of some of these bill mills say invented issues detract from real ones.
We don't need this. It's not anything that we need to be addressing. But they make it sound like it's a big problem.
And the, quote, solutions these groups peddle benefit them.
There's an agenda behind them.
Not Idahoans. Although the same can be said about many model bills.
It follows the money, and there's a lot of money in that. And so they have all these resources to go to come up with all this crazy, wacky legislation you see.
Do you think it's important that you as a lawmaker know exactly who is behind these bills?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think that's very important to kind of have an idea on who's behind that bill. And that's something that can kind of get lost in the shuffle of things.
But ultimately, Redmond and Mitchell feel the contents and language of a bill are more important than where it comes from.
As long as the bill does what it needs to do, I think that's the important part.
And this is not unique to the Republican Party in America. Progressive and liberal special interest groups pitch model legislation to Democrats as well. Although with our Republican-dominated legislature, it's not as common in Idaho. The prevalence of model legislation, Brian, is actually really hard to quantify. I found that during my research because a lot of times the text of a bill may not be copied and pasted. It may not be identical or mirror something from one of these groups, but the idea itself is copied.
I was going to ask you about the line in there about follow the money. How easy is it to kind of track who's paying for these bills, these lobbyists?
You know, it really depends. That's something we didn't totally dive down.
Right.
We talked about it with the pesticide bill, but what I did for this story was look up Form 990s, how much money these massive national organizations, these think tanks, are garnering and what we call dark money.
Yeah.
I talked about that, but that's a whole other story that we can definitely dive into, is looking into exactly, like Bayer, what companies and people are spending money on what bills in Idaho.
Exactly. All right. Super interesting. Thanks, Morgan.
You bet.